But the purpose of this coffee chat is really, like I said, just to get students to kind of see you as more of a normal human being, because, you know, when you put a PhD behind someone's name, they sometimes become someone different to a student where, I mean, I didn't even know what a PhD really was until I started one, you know?
So true. Yeah.
So it's kind of meant in that kind of purpose of just letting everybody see you're not, you know, this big scary researcher, but that you're actually someone who wants to form, you know, connections and have a lab and have students be a part of that process.
Sounds good.
Cool. So my first question, you know, to keep it really simple. So what got you interested in research initially as a option for your career path? And then along with that is what is the big question that you're trying to answer with your research career currently?
Yeah. So to answer the first question, I will say, as is common for a lot of people, I went into graduate school with one idea of what I would do with my degree and ended up changing my mind. So I am a clinical psychologist. And so one of the really neat things about that is that I got a bunch of training in doing clinical work. I got training in research and I got to teach. So I actually taught some undergrad courses. And I had gone in thinking I wanted to be a clinician. And while I loved clinical work, I didn't like it as much as I thought I was going to. And I ended up really, really loving research. And so following my PhD was actually when I jumped a bit even more into the research world. And I did a postdoctoral fellowship at the VA hospital. And I did a mix of research and clinical work. And then I did a second postdoc, which is also pretty common. And it did the full-time research. And so I think being able to have the opportunity to do kind of both things and kind of seeing what kind of worked best for me. And I think why I love research so much is that every bit of information that you gain, you kind of answer a question, you end up with so many more. And you can kind of dive down the rabbit hole and kind of answer these questions. I think, you know, so many of us, like, we go to school and we're interested in the pursuit of knowledge. And so it feels, one, incredible to learn more things, and then two, to then be able to share what you've learned. And I will say that I still kind of keep that clinical connection. And so it's always been nice to have that little piece. And so for me, it's like I do the work to help patient populations. And so that's always like really, really motivating as well. So that's kind of how I got into research. And so then the work that I do, so I work broadly in the trauma realm, more specifically looking at kind of outcomes of trauma related to post-traumatic stress disorder, substance use disorder, most specifically alcohol use disorder, and then resilience. So right, kind of we got the flip side of the coin there. And so my area of interest is on both the kind of the etiology, meaning kind of how do these things develop, what makes someone at risk for developing PTSD or alcohol use disorder following trauma, what makes folks resilient, with the idea that understanding that helps us identify those that are more at risk, helps us say, hey, what makes someone resilient? How can we teach that? And how can we take that knowledge to kind of improve existing treatment? So one of my particular areas of interest is the co-occurrence of PTSD and alcohol use disorder. They tend to co-occur really, really often. And that's an extra complicated population. So trying to understand why somebody might be at risk for both things. And then understanding that, trying to figure out how do we best treat? And so how can we improve existing treatments for that? And I do this from like multimodal, basically meaning from different domains. So we look at psychosocial bits of information, more cognitive, physiological, so more biological from a genetic perspective. So kind of a wide range of those factors. So hopefully that's kind of, being succinct is not my strong suit. So sorry.
No, that was great. You know, I mean, and it's always nice because by hearing about the research, it's always nice because then people can start kind of forming those connections of like, am I interested in learning about this kind of work? I know, especially since you're part of the psychology field, which is such a broad field that can incorporate so many different disciplines within it as well.
Yeah, true.
Nice to have a little bit of an idea of like where your niche is within that.
Yeah. And also too, I think you end up in a domain maybe you didn't expect to because of what you've seen. So like a lot of my early training was on anxiety, that kind of transitioned to more trauma when I worked at a VA hospital. And then I learned a lot on kind of trauma work. And then you see that, hey, it looks like so many patients that have PTSD also have alcohol use disorder. And so that interest actually developed from my clinical work too. And so that's often what happens as well. The more you learn, kind of your kind of interest kind of shift. So.
Yeah, that's super cool. So then getting into, you know, someone who wants to help in a lab or is thinking about this. So how do you recruit students? Do students contact you or communicate with you to develop a relationship? How does that typically work for you? And how would you like it to work for someone?
Yeah, so I mean, to be honest, it's shifted over the years. So I'm a new faculty, so I've only been faculty for, I'm in my 4th year, so about 3+ years. So I've not had students for very long, but I love working with undergrad students. And so early on, I've definitely had some students who just kind of emailed me with interest. And before I'd even started a project, I ended up bringing on a student that ended up just volunteering and helping on the front end of a research project. Once I got more established, I did more of the formal. I like to do the undergrad 494, 492, which is like the independent study. That's for psychology. I don't know sorry, that's not a helpful number for non-psychology students. But and that used to be kind of a specific kind of posting on like the psych bulletin, but now there's a student opportunity center
Yeah.
that Herb Hill runs. He's the best. And so that's actually how I posted most recently. And so basically it's just a typical description. So you do it for credit. It can be flexible, 3 to 4 credits, or sorry, 2 to 3 credits, which is 6 to 9 hours a semester. I've liked doing it that way because it's a bit more structured. I think that's helpful for students. We also then tag in like learning experiences. We spend time doing article reviews and CVs, and so there's a bit of that professional development piece. But certainly we're open, and other kind of colleagues that I work with also just take volunteers as well. So that's certainly an option. But yeah, I do actively recruit. I will say during kind of COVID times, things are a bit slower. I've had a smaller lab. So I've definitely had to turn down quite a lot of students. But we do kind of informal-ish mini interviews with students, and my coordinator and I just to kind of get that experience and then bring on a handful of students each semester.
Sure. So you mentioned, the 492 type of class. So are you looking for students particularly who have some psychology background? Can someone be outside the major and join your lab? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I, generally speaking, we more often have psychology students, but we've definitely had a good bit of students that are interested in pre-med in our broader lab group, and also some students that are interested in public health. So it can definitely be broad. Given that I do clinical population work, is usually students that are like, oh, I'm interested in substance use, or I'm interested in PTSD for obvious reasons. But I'm a big proponent that so much of research translates across. And so you're learning skills that whether you end up, doing, I'm trying to think of different things like social sciences or the medical field, a lot of the skills are going to be the same. And so if there's a student that's just interested in the process of research, I think that's really all that you need. Obviously, I think you get a bit more interested if you're interested in the mental health side or the patient population. But just students that are interested in the act of doing research, I think that's really all that matters.
So getting into the undergraduates who do research, what do you see as the role of an undergraduate research student in your lab?
So I would say they're help keep literally everything running. So I have a study coordinator who actually works with my RAs a lot, but we all meet together as a team as well. And so because I'm currently running active research, there is kind of a role on kind of all fronts. And so what I mean by that is kind of on the early stage, we have students that help with basic tasks like, putting together brochures in envelopes to mail out to recruit. Then we also have data coming in, and they're entering data. We use REDCap as our database, kind of entering that data. We also have physiological data that we're collecting, so they learn how to process kind of eye blink responses as one of our variables, and so learning how to process that data. And then as students kind of move on in their experience and what they've kind of checked off their list on skills, they then actually take on higher level roles and actually interact with participants. So they do scheduling reminders, phone calls, actually do some screening to determine eligibility. They set up the lab tasks, so we collect the physiological data, and they come in and help prep all of that, and kind of do all the kind of the day-to-day assistance for actually making a project run. And that is so often what like a research assistant responsibility is. And truly, research doesn't happen without RA help. And it's a lot of that hands-on work. So.
That's really great, because I know the way that an undergraduate researcher can be used in a lab really depends on the professor and on the researcher, because I've been in labs where as the graduate student, I just do all the work. And then I've been in labs where I need a team to accomplish the research.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And it also depends on where a project is, right? Sometimes you're spending a lot of time doing a lit search. Sometimes you're just entering a lot of data, but whatever it is that you're doing, it is absolutely crucial to the research. So.
Right. So then what do you see as your role in the lab with your research assistants? How do you want them to view you as they learn what it's like to be in a lab and being part of that pet project?
So I like to be a really, really good resource. So my general approach to all students is that please ask any and all questions. One, if you get a person, talking about something they're interested in, we will happily tell you anything, and then we'll answer more than you even wanted to know. But I'm also a big proponent of, I would always rather clarify or confirm that you're right or fix it before kind of moving ahead and having there be an error and having to fix it. So I always want to be like a really good go-to person. With the caveat that sometimes with the day-to-day things, my coordinator actually knows more of what's happening. And so I tend to think of my role also as being hopefully a person that can introduce students to a lot of the broader aspects of research. Mm-hmm. So for example, we spend a lot of time talking about research ethics and kind of, the importance of volunteer, of consent. There's a lot of misunderstandings out there about like, oh, you can't ask about self-harm, and you can't do research on trauma exposed populations, and all of those are untrue. And so it's a lot of, I think my role is to dispel some of those myths, but also to I'm a big proponent of like data privacy, data security, and so teaching kind of why that is important. And I also really love introducing into kind of like the process of research of like, a question came up. I'm actually not really sure how to answer that. Let's talk about it in the team. Let's adapt our protocol, because research is always kind of in flux. But we also need to document everything. And so kind of introducing that whole approach to research. And so the importance of, reproducibility and transparency in research, and making sure that our participants always remember that they can stop at any time, or, like why we do different things. And so like a really quick example is, you go through a survey, we always have an option of like, choose not to answer. Well, why is that an option? And so like kind of trying to be the person that explains kind of the why of a lot of like the small little things that we do. And then introducing students to things that I wish I had learned earlier on. As you know, it's like harder to learn new things. So examples of that is like referencing software. So, using Zotero. So like, let's search for an article. Let's get really good at, using, and to be honest, I actually use Google Scholar just as much as I use PubMed and PsycInfo. Yeah. And then like, let's save everything. And now when you're writing a paper, it's like my favorite thing is when I've had students, like they learn how to use Zotero and like they write a paper for class using it. I'm like, oh, I'm so proud. But you've also learned this skill that will translate moving forward, and even teaching, let's read a journal article and actually get a sense of what academic articles look like and how you can read them and get the most out of them. Because those are skills that will, whether or not students go on to anything at all related to what the lab is, it's teaching skills that I think are really, really useful. To become a better consumer of the literature and hopefully get really jazzed about kind of diving into lit searches and everything like that. So, I'm not sure that totally answered your question, but I think that's broadly kind of the role I like to have. Get students really great. Exciting about science and research. So.
That was great. It's funny because you basically described the process that I went through for my comps and my dissertation with using Zotero and Google Scholar. Like, those were my two programs that I could not do research without, because they're like my citing gurus.
Yes, it is like game changing. And it's funny, like of the how much things change. Like I still even, I was not that long ago that I got my PhD, but it was long ago and now we're like, I had binders of PDFs. I couldn't highlight a PDF. Like I had to print it and highlight it. And so it's neat to see how all of those things change, and there's just so much at their fingertips. So yeah.
That's amazing. So my last question for you today is, what would you like your students to take away from their time doing research in your lab?
Well, I guess, a lot of things. If I were to think and kind of list a couple, I think one of the pieces is to have a better understanding of kind of what's under the hood of research. Because I think we tend to see kind of, here's the permanent product, or we see like somebody presents work and you're like, where did that all kind of come from? And so I think kind of an appreciation of all the different pieces that kind of went into the work. And also to get a sense that so much of research is not knowing the answer. And that very often, like, we don't know. And like, we had a protocol for a reason. We think that might be right. Actually turns out that didn't work. So let's adapt it. We document everything. Of course, you always get approvals. And so to realize the idea that it's, I think there's that misunderstanding that's like, researchers know what they're doing it everything, it's all going to be correct and perfect and right, but it's like, that's the joy of science, is that we correct and adapt, and if we don't know, we say we don't know, and we learn from what we've done, and it's always kind of growing and constantly changing. And so I think that would be kind of a broader takeaway, but also I think to also see the value in the small little pieces. So my favorite part is when a student, usually their second semester, they'll do an actual independent project. Like, so you wrap posters, and it's really nice for them to get to actually run some analyses on their actual data and say, hey, this was actually data that, you sat down for a few hours and like entered these numbers, but that's what those numbers turned into. Is I think so often, depending on kind of the background that people have, is they just get data sets and they kind of like work with them. And I think it's really important to, one, see all the work that went into it, but also to have an appreciation for the participants who, offer their time sometimes, right? Like, we do complicated, assessments. And so we're asking them to be open about vulnerable things to a person they don't know. And I think kind of that appreciation for kind of respect for kind of the participants as well, I think is probably one of the things I think is really important to get. So.
Great. Thank you so much for taking a few minutes to join me for the coffee chat today.
Yeah, absolutely.